Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It is a partly cloudy day today, and it's time for us to take our exam. And this is going to be a little bit more extended than a Cliff Notes version, but I'm doing this because of the folks that I've helped in acquiring solar across this country to get the equipment that they want that is minimum substantial enough to do what we do out here. And because it is basically a duplication for most part, for most of you who've ordered your parts, it's a duplication of the system that I have. I'm going to walk through and show you what I've got and the components and some things that you need to know when it comes time for you to set up your system so that you can hopefully do this without any issue. I like to say to people when I teach them how to do this, it's not that hard. I've helped a lot of people with these systems to understand them, and well, not as a form of constructive criticism, people tend to think more of it than it actually is. And unfortunately, we have that is that P-51 Mustang. That's a pretty cool little plane. P-51 Mustang, old World War II plane. Kind of loud. Nice one. It came roaring by here the other day, and it was like, whoa, dude. But as a form of constructive criticism, many of the folks that I've helped with seem to want to make it more than it actually is. And on top of that, we have an industry that likes to make everything seem like it's bigger than it is and more complicated than it is. And that way, you know, people in business to do this can make you feel like you're getting your money's worth, because what they're doing is super, super special. Well, there is a substantial amount of knowledge. I paid over $5,000 to go through NABCEP certified training, and well, I'm going to give it to you here in, like I said, the extended Cliff Notes version. And we're going to walk through a whole lot of data that you want to consider in the setting up of your system for those of you who have gotten the similar equipment. Now, some of you are going to modify your systems based on a few components and some budget and the number of certain items that you ordered. So, for those of you who have or have not, I have a Solar 101 series of 10 videos. Every one of them is 30 minutes to 45 minutes long, and they go into detail on the system components and understanding system sizing. And for abbreviation, I'm going to call it doing the math. All right, because you're going to have to do a lot of math to make sure that your components are balancing out with each other. And we'll go through that a bit in some of the parameters that you can modify with this system based on your budget, because you know these items add up, and not everybody has the same kind of budget. But in order to maximize your power potential, there are certain things that you can do and can't do to kind of get around things. We have a pretty sizable battery bank on our system, but we still treat it as if we don't, and we generally are very attentive to what we have in the way of sun as to what we're running at the time, and that's why T and I will go plug in and unplug as the day progresses based on the level of sun, or whether we use a backup generator. So we started off on a generator this morning thinking we're going to be full on clouds, but this broken clouds in and out is enough power for us to be running all 4 of our chest freezers. So and that's because of size. So let's do a quick review on the Solar 101. There are 4 main components to your solar system. You're going to have your panels, which is your production. So you can only produce as much power as what you have in the way of panels. Very important. You have your charge controller, your inverter, or your charge controller, then your batteries, which is how much you can store and how much you can run without solar input. And then you have your inverter, which basically determines how much power you can do at one time. How much can you create and produce at one time. So we're going to hit each one of these. And in discussion in size, we're going to also hit wiring sizes for connecting them. And we're going to also discuss here real quick the intermediate components called the fuses, breakers, and disconnects. Those are your safety devices that keep you from having issues if something goes a little awry on any one of your components. Something happens, because sometimes people like to maximize the math on all their components, and in doing so they have the potential, should something some anomaly happen or a breakdown or something, to overload things. And especially it helps if you have breakers and disconnects between components, so that if you do have to work on something, or while you're connecting things, you can keep things shut off so that you can work safely. So as far as safety practices are concerned, I will deter you all to all the wonderful, good electrical people out there that have done videos that can teach you all of this. This video is solely for the purpose of making sure we have walked through the setup and the wiring and connection of this basic system, which is pretty much a hell of a lot of off-grid systems out there that look like this and are set up like this. So let's start with one concept. Generally, or let me ease into it. Generally, there's two questions I ask whenever I'm sizing a system or working to help somebody get the power that they want. Is first off, the main question is, what do you want to power? The second question is, what is your budget? First, it is a very a determining factor. The first one determines basically what you can or can't do with your system. What do you want to power? You need to know how much power you're going to want to use on a regular basis. And then, of course, budget's going to determine whether you can afford those parts and pieces to go along with it. So once you have a determination of what you want to power, and you know that's within your budget, let's assume that everything that I talk about will be within your budget for the sake of discussion here. When we get to some variables that you could upsize or downsize based on your budget, I'll explain that as we go through. So your two main components that are going to really determine the performance of your system as a whole, match with your ability to manage that performance, because those are two different things, are going to be your charge controller and your inverter. Those two things will determine the whole system as what you can max out and do. And what we're going to talk about are some Schneider components, is what I have here. There are other brands, and we'll discuss those as we go along. But the Schneider components that we have are the MPPT 60 charge controller. That's a 60 amp, 150 volt max, which is very important, which means you need to match your string voltage to the voltage max that your charge controller is. And then your output is going to be the base of your inverter, where we have a Schneider 4024. That means it's a 4,000 watt inverter, and it's a 24 volt inverter. Okay, so those two things kind of set it. So with the 24 volt inverter, or excuse me, the 4,000 watt inverter, I have the potential to run everything that I want, because it is a two-leg system. It is a 240 volt system, which means I've got 2 legs that I can use to run a well pump, and that's a big determining factor for a lot of people to be able to have water and to run their wells. Now you can get 110 volt well pumps, but then you have to pull the one out, replace it, and put it back in. And if your depth is too deep, that may not work. It only really works for more shallower wells, 300 feet or less. 200 to 250 is kind of where you're pushing it for your depth on those. And other people might have different opinions on it, but generally speaking, you can do it on the 110. So I have the potential that I could do 240. Now, nothing that I'm running out here today runs on 240. Everything I'm doing is all 110. Even my welders, my lathes, table saws, everything that I can run is all done on 110. But I have the potential to it. The other aspect of it is the potential of your production. So let's start in with the system construction and the variables of it with the first component. Let's talk about solar panels next. Okay, so a couple main concepts that you need to keep in mind when setting up your system and the panels. Panels need to work in unison together with equal sun exposure for them to work the most efficiently. Unfortunately, come around here, you have inside the panels, you have individual cells. These are 6-inch by 6-inch cells, and these are called strings, and then these are series. So in all our discussion of solar panels and batteries, we will talk about them in the form of strings and series. A string is when you connect, come around here, when you connect a series of panels together. So like these 3 are all connected here and here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 3 panels in a string. When you're connecting these strings together, you need to be able to know the data that is on these strings. So this is a nominal power of 260 watts. Short circuit ampage is 8.9. Maximum power is 8.45. Open circuit voltage is 38, and voltage maximum power is 30.78, and that's under load. So what you're looking for are 2 numbers on there. The highest numbers that you will have are both of those. So the highest number here is the 38 volts. Okay, that's what you're going to do your math on. You also need to know the highest ampage, because these are they're producers of power, and as long as you have any light on them, they're working to some extent. So for safety reasons, always be aware that that these things are on if it has light on them. Different amounts of light have different amounts of power that they can create. There are some cloudy days where we have 1,700 watts here, but we're only producing 100 watts total for the whole array. So when we get to talking about strings and series, we're going to talk about sizing these to match the charge controller and the input to the charge controller, so that you're getting as much as you can, but not overtasking the charge controller, because that's its purpose is to protect your batteries from the amount of power that you can produce with the solar panels. Now, let's do a quick discussion on mounting and some basic generals of how we do this. For the most part, I am a keep it off the roof kind of girl. I don't want to see solar panels on the roof if I can help it, because they're not very efficient there. And that has to do with some math and calculations when it comes to solar radiation during the day's path of the sun. And there's a lot of discussion. We could do multiple videos on this, but I want to keep it simple. If you have a fixed mount and it's on a roof or on poles on the ground and it's a fixed mount, you have about a 6-hour window of maximum operating conditions. When you take the panels and you put them onto a pole like this, I can follow the sun throughout the day. So I can take fewer panels and get more power out of them because I'm following the sun. And T and I will do that throughout the day, and we can you know, come out here and turn the panels several times during the day, and then back in the morning and 2 or 3 times during the day to keep our panels facing as close to 90 degrees the rays of the sun. You know, a little variation here and there is one thing, but when you start having a sharp angle on those panels, you don't get very much production out of it. It's the amount of light that you're actually hitting it, because each one of those little light rays pushes through the cells and it creates electrons to be forced through. So you want as much as possible. So when it comes to mounting them, I would recommend that, if at all possible, that you find or make your own pole mount. Now, I do have some videos back in my video selection somewhere about how to. I've got some how to build on design, shape, and all of how I do this particular pole mount. So if you want to know how to do that, well, you can do that separately from this video. However, mounting for the most part is pretty much the same above the foundation. So consider the pole mount the foundation or the roof the foundation. If you have a pole mount, everything from the frame up, so from the L foot to the rail and up, is going to be the same on a roof. Now on a roof, depending upon what kind of roofing material you have, you may have multiple different kinds of mounting fasteners for that. If you have an asphaltic shingle roof, you'll have a flashing mount that will tuck under the shingles, and then you will lag them into your trusses or something to anchor them to the roof. With other kinds of roof, like sheet metal roofing, there's different kinds of seal mounting units that will, you know, provide a seal, because water is the biggest issue, and that's why I hate doing any kind of roof penetrations, is because anytime you do, you're rolling the die on that failing and water getting into the house somehow. So I prefer, plus fewer panels on a pole, and you can do a whole lot more this way. So with roof mounting, if you have metal roofing, maybe it's a standing seam. There's a different, you know, there's clamps and stuff that have been made for all the different kinds of roofs that you have out there. So we won't get into it, but what you will need to do on any mounting situation is to make sure that your array is all on the same plane. Okay, so if you can see this, they're all basically flat. And that's what you go from here up. So basically your L feet, which is going to either bolt to the frame of the pole, or this is going to bolt to the roof mount of whatever form a roof mount is. You'll step up to your rails. This is the next most important component. We didn't talk about mounting much in the 101 series, the first 10 videos. It was mainly based on the system itself. But you'll need rails long enough to handle whatever string of panels you get. Then there are several different kinds of end clamps, and this is a nice one because it tucks up underneath the panel. This is a universal end clamp. Show them the inside here, where it cam locks back up in there. Yeah, so it comes up in here and it holds the panel down from right here. Very good. The others are over here, and these are your standard mid clamps. So they just bite on the edge right here and screw down to your frame there. So what you're looking for is whatever array you're going to have of however many panels you're going to have, to make sure you have rails that will cover it. And a good system standard is, a minimum three rail. You can get those, and whatever you order here tends to come LTL carrier for most of the equipment supply companies out there. So you'll get big long boxes with the rails in it. But you want to know, or you'll need to know size-wise, how many panels you're going to put together per a string, and that's all going to be based on the voltage adding up to be under the maximum that your charge controller will allow. So for our systems here, and what many of you are going to do, because you're going to mimic this system, is you're going to go with a string of 3 panels. So let's just say, for sake of it, we got 38 volts as the highest voltage there. Well, if you do the math on that, let's round it to 40. So 3 times 40 is 120, right? Well, that's not quite 150, and you'd be tempted to take this lower number right here, the voltage maximum power at 30, and say, oh well, if I do 4 panels, that's really I could get 120 volts out of 4 panels, but it's not quite that. It doesn't quite work that way, and there's a reason for it. But the point is this: your charge controller's highest voltage that it can handle is 150 volts. We'll also look at that and how that works with the breakerage here, and what those systems have been designed for. But the point is this: you got to do the math. You want to make sure that whatever string of panels you get, it stays below that 150 at the max voltage. Because if I added another panel to it, the maximum power voltage here of 30.78, you think that you could get 4 panels, but you can't, because you got to use the larger number of 38 volts. At 38 volts open circuit. Because what happens is this: in certain conditions, when the temperature is very cold out, and we've had this happen when we were up in Montana, and you get that first initial pop of sun on here, there is a split second there where the voltage can build up, and because you have an open circuit and we haven't the charge controller hasn't actually turned on, there is a split second where you can have a buildup of a higher voltage, and then it dumps it out as soon as it turns on, and it will overvolt the whole system. That's where your breakers come in. We'll talk about that in just a second. So you want to do the math for that. Now, each string is going to be based on a addition of your voltages. Okay? So the reason I say all of this is because, many of us have talked about a SHTF situation where, hailstones went through this one, but I got 2 here, and I got a couple 100-watt panels like those little ones. Can I add them together, and can I hodgepodge them? And the answer is yes, you can do that. You could add a whole bunch of different size panels together for a string to go into this charge controller, and your total amount of watts will be the wattage of that string. Here's the important part. That's fine for one string, but whenever you have more than one string, so I got upper string and a lower string, whenever you have more than one string, you must balance those strings, because your charge controller is going to seek the frequency and the voltage of the highest one that comes in. So you'll have 2 frequencies going in into your charge controller, and it will not take both voltages and maximize both of them. However, the MPPT charge controllers will take any voltage and it will work with it, but it won't take 2 different ones. So you have to balance your strings. Now, sizing your strings, maximizing them out to what they were, adding them, are all going to be based on two factors. The first factor is what's the most you can put into your charge controller. Okay. Well, the charge controller that we're talking about is the Schneider 60, the MPPT 60 amp 150 volt, which means it doesn't want to take more than 150 volts, and it doesn't want to take more than 60 amps. Well, if we're talking about the ampage here of 8.45, or the potential of up to 8.99, which is 9, let's just use 9, then we're talking, okay, well, that thing could take 150 volts at 60 amps. Well, then that means I could add the voltage for strings. So there's 150 volts, there's 150 volts less, whatever that is. And now I can add my strings together, so 9 and 9, that's 18. Well, for all intents and purposes, that's you could double that and then triple that. You could go up to more strings. You could add more strings. That puts you up to the potential of adding 6 strings. So 6 times 9 is 54. That would keep you just under the 60 amps, right? 54 amps is less than 60. So you could do that. Most of the time what I've done is there is a lot of power here in this, and if you know how to use it, you can well, we've lived off of it for 8-9 years now on just this much power right here. We've done everything we want. But there are those that want to try and because of their budget, do more with the power that they've got. So they have, and most of your, dare I talk about them, grid tie systems, they use a lot more panels. But that's because those power companies benefit for it, and the solar installation companies are geared towards maxing them out for reasons that they don't exactly tell you. But for your sake, starting with 6 panels is a good base. Now, I've done a lot of systems where people wanted to be able to have more power for doing other things within normal work, closer to living on the grid kind of lifestyle of less hands-on monitoring. In that case, I've gone to where I've done 2 of these pole mounts, 12 panels. You're talking, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 3 kilowatts of power. And when you talk about 3 kilowatts of power, you're talking about covering, in your normal production, covering the amount of power that most homes use on a regular basis anyway. So the ability to put two poles up is really good, because then you can turn one way, or a lot of mounts or pole mounts are set up where you have what's known as the flying V configuration, where you have a fixed mount to the southeast and a fixed mount to the southwest. That way we have a good amount of sun in the morning and a good amount of sun in the evening. Then you don't have to turn the panels. That's also can be applied to people who have a ridge of their roof that is in a north-south orientation, and they'll put some on the east face and some on the west face in order to get sun in the morning and the evening, because they don't have a general southerly orientation to catch that swing of the sun all day long, if that makes sense. So let's talk some connectors here. Along with the rails and the end clamps and mid clamps, there's a variety of different manufacturers that come out with a bunch of neat little new things. But the original ones are like these. This is very similar to the black ones there. These are the mid clamps. There's an L foot, very common to hold the rail down, and somewhere in here. And there's an old style of end clamp that would clamp over the edge of the panel and hold it down to the rail, kind of like that. One of the things you'll order with your panels is a handful of these MC4 connectors. Alright, there are the internal connecting, electrical connecting, and the outside shielding connectors. There are females and then there are males. There are males and females of the internal parts, and the female metal piece goes into the male MC4 connector, and the male internal piece goes into the female MC4 connector. These parts are something that you're probably going to want to get a couple extras of, because it's possible to, screw them up. I've seen that happen quite a bit. They're not too difficult to put together, and I do have a video on that. But having many connectors, making sure maybe you have a few extra of your mounting clamps in case something happens to one. Always have extras. So those are your MC4 connectors. Let's go back to the pole. All right, let me take this. All right, on your panel, all panels will come with a positive and negative wire out, and it generally has some kind of indication on the panel of which one's positive and which one's negative. So when you go to set up your string, you're going to connect the positive of this panel to the negative of this panel, the positive of this panel to the negative of this panel. That's where the MC4 connectors are going to come in handy, because you're going to need to then take the MC4 connector that is female, and you're going to have to create a home run, is what it's called, or a pigtail, which goes from the outer part of this string and the outer part over here. So one will be negative or positive and one will be negative, and then you're going to bring them in to the box. Go give me a screwdriver, Phillips. So these 4 cables are the 4 home runs for the 2 strings. So there's 2 negatives and 2 positives in these cables. So this one comes in around, and then this one comes in around, and then the one from up here comes down around, and the other one from here comes over and around. And you kind of want, that was very important. Make sure you take notes on that. So what you have is the 2 strings, and basically you're bringing in home runs. There's 2 different kinds of cable that you can get. This is a solar cable, which means it has a jacket on the outside that is designed to withstand UV radiation. So this is 10-AUG cable, and all of this wiring is 10-AUG. Go ahead and take that off. So let's take a look at the breakerage between the panels and the charge controller. Let's see. Oh, there's a little buggies or 2 in there. Let's see if we can get the light in there. Yeah, push that in there. Now, as far as this is a disconnect, and this is the Midnight Solar. Here, hold on. Midnight Solar, and this is a MNPEPV3, I think is the part number on this. And this is where we get into the breakerage or the disconnects. This is called a combiner box, because essentially what you're doing is combining this string and this string together, and we're going to bring all the negatives, because you can see right in there the 2 negatives coming in, and then the 2 positives, you see the positives on the breakers, come into here, and this is where we can turn on or off each string, and then this is considered a bus bar, and that's considered a bus bar. And from the bus bars, and you see this main lug right here, and what I have essentially this wire right here, this is the negative run to the charge controller, and this is the positive. So I have the two negatives. Now this is MN-EPB3, which means I can get 3 strings on here. I could have made huge, much bigger pole mount, and then had another string on here. Or I could have done a fixed mount and we could have had 9 panels and I could have done another string here. But they also make an MN-EPV6, which would allow you to go up to 6 strings, which is what we were discussing a little earlier about, coming close to maximizing the power of the charge controller. So the wire size, now, all right, wire size on these pigtails. Once you get a connector attached to the one end and then you bring it in here, like I said, you can see it's a 10 AUG wire. You could do this with standard THHN number 10 AUG. That would work just fine to do these. I have done that. I generally try and do my wire maintenance and keep everything up underneath the panel so they don't get a whole lot of sun, but it will work. They don't tend to want to seal there's a little gasket in here. They don't want to seal as easily with a number 10 wire because it's a little bit thinner. It doesn't have the thicker jacket, the black jacket over top of it. So, but it will work. If you can, get some of the solar wire. And then once you get to here, there are 2 wire sizes that I generally go with bringing the power from the pole mount into to the cabin or shop or wherever we put the equipment. The first is, and they're both, because this is DC, they're both determined. Here, you take that. They are both determined, come on, get up in there, by how far you have to run. Come on. There you go. Alright, where's your screwdriver? And your screw. They're both determined by distance. And we won't get too deep into the distance calculations and wire sizing calculations. You can do that if you need to, if you exceed what I'm getting ready to tell you. So, anything more than about 50 foot, so everything from 50 foot to the from between the combiner box and the charge controller, you can go with as low as a number 10 wire if you're running little girls. Some come out, they're coming out. If you're running less than 2 strings or less, you can get away with it. But more you go up, the more power you go up to, the more strings you have, the higher or larger size wire that you want to get to handle the wattage that's going through it, because wire is a resistor, and if you get too much through a thin wire, it will heat up, and you don't kind of want that. So anything less than 50 foot, you can run number 10 on less than 2 strings. So if you go up in your strings or further in your distance, you're going to want to go up in wire size. I had number 8 wire, so I used my number 8 wire to do the run between here and the charge controller. Whenever possible, always try and do a conduit protector for your cabling. But generally speaking, if at all possible, you want to keep your array Less than 100 feet. I've done a few systems because of the position of the house that I had to go out as far as 100 foot away. But once you get out that far, you need much bigger cable in order to handle running the power. And there is voltage loss. There will always be voltage loss on the DC. So even though this might nominally be 1700 volts, I think the most we've ever seen on our charge controller reading is somewhere in the 5 to 550 range. So there's your panels, panel sizing, string sizing, series of strings, mounting. Oh, and I will say the calculations on the pole, for every foot that you go up in height, you go down a foot. So if this is a 6-foot schedule 44-inch pole, just make sure that you're down at least 3 foot because of the wind pressure that you have on this. Now, we've had a lot of installs of pole mounts, and we've had a lot of wind testing on it. And then we had some 60, 70 mile an hour winds hit one that was only in 1.5 foot, and it still held, but it shook it pretty hard. You definitely want it in the ground. So let's move on to the charge controller. Let's go take a look at that. Alright, in this big CF of wires that we have here, essentially we have our two number 8 wires coming in here. They come in down low on the wall, and they come up here for the positive and negative. So this is the run from the array to come into the cabin here. And so let's take a look at this. I've removed the panels so that we can see our wiring and connections here. And as you can see, 320 watts. It's kind of cloudy out, and we've got several of our freezers running on it. 27.8 volts. Pretty good, not bad. But let's take a look at the connection here. As you can see, through that little piece of conduit, I've got these two wires right here, and you can't read it here because the labeling is up underneath, but one of them, I don't remember which one's which. One is positive and one is negative here. Okay, and those go in. So up in there it says battery positive, battery negative on each of those. And then here we have the two takeoffs for the battery positive. Or excuse me, that would say solar positive, solar negative. My bad, so because it's coming in from the solar. These two would say battery positive, battery negative. And I've used the same number 8 cable. Okay, and we did a little wire change up here because of what I had available. I used some things that I didn't need to, but you'll see that here in just a second. So you've got your power coming in. The disconnects, or the combiner box out on the pole, is what protects this from too much power coming in off the panels, especially if you really push the limits on the voltage of your strings. So it comes directly into here. Then this will convert it to a lower voltage, because its output is 27.6 because we have a 24 volt battery bank. Okay. Now this particular charge controller will handle different voltage battery banks. It'll do a 12, a 24, a 36, and a 48, and maybe another one or two, but it does a wide array of battery configurations. You want to set that. You'll also, when you go through the programming, of course, dare I say it, for all your equipment, read the manuals, read the books, okay? But so once it comes in here, This takes whatever voltage is coming in off of your array and converts it down to the voltage that's necessary for the batteries. You also want to have some protection between the charge controller and the battery. So the positive, which would be this one right here, comes down and goes into a 60 amp breaker here. And you want that 60 amps in there because this is a 60 amp MPPT 60, so you want to match your numbers again. So you got a 60 amp. I also have an 80 amp standing by for other purposes, but won't need that for now. So we go from that, and then I went up into a number 6 6-AUG cable. So this is the breaker cable that goes, or the breaker for the cable. And yeah, I used a extra green, so it's not ground. It's actually positive going to the batteries, and you can see as it comes down, it goes to the positive terminal on one of the strings. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 strings. That gives me 6 times 4, 24 nominal voltage, but you know, right now we're sitting at 27 because you have to have enough pressure to push electrons back through the system in order to charge the battery back up. So we have 3 strings here, and then off of the negative terminal here is a number 8 wire for the negative to go back up to the charge controller. So the charge controller comes down with that green wire and then goes back up with that black wire. Back there you see a battery temperature sensor that plugs into the negative terminal and into the charge controller, so the charge controller knows the condition of the batteries. You can also see that it's springtime. It's about time for me to get these dudes out and do a service on them. And if you can, when you're buying batteries, see if you can't talk them into giving you one of these. Maybe if they won't give it to you, at least buy it. This is a cable or a battery carry handle like such. Okay, very helpful because these things are heavy. So when we talk about strings and series, it's the same for batteries as well. Batteries and solar cells are very similar in they both produce electricity. One does it chemically, one does it through photons of light pushing electrons on. But the point is, we're talking about the math. So because our charge controller, or excuse me, our inverter is a 4,000 watt 24 volt input system, then we have to have a 24 volt battery bank. Now you add voltages across and then you add ampages in your series. So we'll go from what is it, 225 amp hours right there, whatever it is on that rating, that would be added up. So you're talking 675 amp hours for the 3 strings, which means you could do quite a bit overnight. Now we don't, because when it comes to the batteries, as I stated before, the life of a battery is the number of times you deep cycle these dudes. So you really don't want to do that very often, but you do need to do that from time to time in order for plate maintenance, and that's a whole different topic. We're just talking about installation today. So let's look at what we've got. So our strings connect positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative. That creates our string. Okay. Then we go from string to string. We have what is essentially a negative bus. So from negative to negative to negative to negative on these 3 strings. So I'm connecting this string to this string to this string via the negative to negative to negative. And it's the same over here for positive to positive to positive. So that is why I've shrink tubed these in red. I've color coded them for myself so it's easy to see when I'm wiring. So that's red is positive terminal. because you can see the positive to red to black, and black is black terminal. So this whole thing's set up color coded. If you have opportunity and you're making your own cables like I do, then you might want to consider getting some different color terminals. But let's talk some basics. One string is all I technically need to make this system work. However, if I only have one string of batteries and I want to run 240 well pump, the draw on that is going to be substantial. In which case, one string of batteries may be subject to a massive discharge in the battery in order to run a well pump for a short period of time, because unless you have a substantial array to handle the power input at that point in time, so you have full sun on your panels and you have enough panels pushing it, it may still want to pull on one set of batteries. I recommend a minimum of 2 strings, because my other 2 systems, the one in the shop and the one at the other lower cabin, both have 2 strings of batteries. But I have 3 here because the larger my battery bank is, the longer it's likely to last, because the less I'm going to discharge the batteries. Now, with the batteries, I don't know if you can hear it but it's bubbling. That's because it's being charged. Power's being put in it, and there's a lot of concern with the batteries about off gassing, and they will tend to do that at first, and they will off gas hydrogen and oxygen. Basically, these are HHO generators, and there's 2 big concerns. One, the potential for a fire or explosion hazard, and a lot of people don't like the smell of the sulfur, so they will want to put them in battery boxes. If I'm not overcharging these batteries, I don't ever smell the sulfur. Only on rare occasions when I put the charging into a oh honey, what's the term when we go up high voltage? God, I done lost it. Equalization, which puts a much higher voltage, up to 30 or 31 volts, depending upon your kind of battery, and it raises up that voltage on it. It really starts to chemically go at it, and then you can smell some. These are here in our cabin, and will never be an issue for us because they're open air. And if there's any hydrogen and oxygen, it's immediately dispersed to a point where it cannot be a fire hazard. And generally speaking, any sulfur smell is dissipated quickly. Usually you only smell the sulfur at 2 times. One, when you first get the batteries and the first time you put a charge to them. For the first couple of days, you'll smell that sulfur. After that, you don't. Now, let's look at it. You saw the red cable, or I say the second time it would do. Let me finish that thought. The second time you would potentially smell it is if you set this into. See, we're up at output of 28.8. So if I went into the enter the menu, history, battery menu, enter equalize active. I go, oops, let's see, battery voltage, go back up, equalization. So if I enter into that, and I can go stop or activate. So I clicked on the activate. Now it's asking me if I want to stop it, and if I hit enter, it's going to wait. It's going to wait until the batteries are fully charged, and at some point here it'll kick up, and then this will go up to like 30.5 or 31 volts, and it will really crank out the power. Let's go back. Oops. Exit there. because we don't need that happening. All right. So we have the two battery cables. Let's talk about battery cables. If you're going to pull any kind of voltage off of this, especially the ampages that are going to be required to run a well pump, you need heavy-duty battery cables. And these are 2-aught welding cables. Excelsiline welding cable, and I order this in 25-foot lengths, and I'll order red and black sometimes. And then I also have a 4-aught cable. So when I go to really pull power, I want basically my pipeline here, the positive and the negative, because there's your 4-aught essentially welding cable, and they come back in here. This breaker box is the Schneider breaker box, and in here a little bit we'll show you a little variation, because I've had you guys, or many of you guys, order a different one. I got this one when I had the money for it. There is a cost difference between Schneider's and another brand, and I tend to go with the other brand because it's a little simpler, but they both work and work fine. So coming back in, you see the positive comes back into a bus bar right here to go into this 250 amp breaker for the protection between the batteries and the inverter. So if you need to, something goes hot wire in here and it starts burning and smoking, and you want to stop this thing, you can hit the breaker and that kills the power. Otherwise, just like solar panels, these batteries will continue to put out power as long as there's a place for it to go. So the protection is in the big 250 amp breaker, and it comes through here and goes through, and it goes into the positive terminal. Red and black. Red's positive, black's ground. And then you can see I have another bus bar here for all the negative, for other negative wires that we could tie to it. And there's some other things that you could do with the system, right? But for this purpose, we only have the negative that comes up, goes around, and comes into the negative. So there's our disconnecting breakers between the charge controller and the batteries to the inverter that bring the power in. Now let's talk bringing your power out to your breaker box, and I will not hold on, wire issues. I will not get into the aspect of the breakers. We'll leave that for an electrical discussion, and I'll leave the electricians to discuss that for people who understand the AC side of things. We're talking about the DC system. There's two wires here that I want you to pay attention to. I cannot show you very easily here because of the location here. Let me see that. T's being the line. You can kind of see the lugs. Ooh, I don't like the waves in that. Alright, just hold it back up there. Alright, so in here there are two, right here, there are two sets of wire inputs. You also have your ground right here. On one set you have your L1, L2, and your L1, L2, and your neutral. So you have two lines and your neutral. And those wires are the white, black, and red. And they go through the wall over here, and they come up into your breaker box. And so you have the two bus bars of the two sets for both legs. So you got 110 on both bus bars, and they come in to the bus bars here, and then your neutral goes to the white neutral bus bar, and you're out. So that's connecting your AC out here. Now you see I've got a piece of direct bury because this is what I had at the time I wanted to use. This is for your L1 neutral in. So you saw down here I have the extension and a plug here. So this generator, or excuse me, this inverter, ooh, it's going to get bright out. Sun's coming out. This inverter has the potential to back charge, get my hand out of the way here, to back charge or be fed in from either the grid, so you can grid connect this and have power coming into it so that the grid can charge the batteries on a cloudy day, or you can have a generator do that. So my plug wraps around out through here, and I'll stick it out the window, and I'll have my generator sitting out here, and you generally want a 4,000 watt generator or higher to do this. But on days that we've had clouds and clouds and clouds and clouds, and we've pulled our voltage down, and I don't want to, I need to charge my batteries back up, I can run power back through my inverter and down, and it will charge the batteries going back through the battery cable. So it'll pump a DC right back through your battery cables and charge the batteries back up that way. But that's it pretty much in a nutshell with the connection here. I am going to go show you a slightly different setup with some different equipment, but all the same thing. So let's go take a look at the lower cabin. Alright, so down here on the lower cabin, you can see I have, and most of you seen this sitting here for a while. What's the matter, Cole? She's down there talking. These panels make really good firewood protectors. Keeps your firewood dry. Just so you might want to use it for that in the future, but they do a real good job of keeping the rain off of your. All right, smile, folks. Trying to make it funny here. So as you can see, I have your standard number 10 THHN 10-AUG with their some NC4 wires connected to it for the time being, just until I can get things done. Eventually, I got to get another pole put in the ground for this system, and it's actually sitting back there. Hey, Smokey, come down to make an appearance. So I got more conduit, and we're going to finish this at a later point, but this has been to get power going temporarily. And let me get in here, and let's turn this on. And I'm going to go ahead and open up some light in here for you, and you can see, oh, I like how my countertop turned out. Now, this is a Magnesign. It is a 4024 two-phase. Hear that? Tick, 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 tick. This one's a little bit louder transformer, but right now it is searching for power usage, and right now there's no load on it until I do this. You hear that thing kick on. A little bit louder. Alright, so this one's going to be a little easier to see. This is the other brand of charge controller, and you can see it's slow flashing. It doesn't have the digital readout. Yes, I gave it to bank. You gonna come in too, Shadow? So you can see my positive and negative come in. Because of the size of this system right now and the closeness, I've only got I got number 10 in, and then I got number 8s going down to the batteries, and I have the two strings. I do not have the combiner box put together because I only have the 2 and 1 single string for the time being. But you can see the positive coming in and the negative coming off. So negative, so that goes back up to the charge controller, but the positive comes in through, and this is a Midnight Solar 250 amp DC disconnect is what it here, let's see. Here's your information, and I'm not going to take the panel out, but essentially I've got the positive coming up, from the positive battery, and it comes into the one side of this breaker and then goes up to the inverter. And then I have the the 63. Now this is a 63 amp breaker. The other one that you saw up there on the other box was a 60 amp breaker. This is a 63 amp breaker because this is a 60 amp MPPT charge controller. So the most I should have coming through here is 60 amps. But the way they've got this one designed is for a 63 amp. Otherwise, these breakers, I may not have stated it out there, these breakers are, well, that's a 63 amp. These breakers are 15 amp and are 150 volt. They're 150 volt, 15 amp for the strings that you would need. So 150 volt for the string of solar panels, then 15 amp, and then the three together would be 45 amps. And then again, if you maxed out either this one, both this Morningstar and the Schneider have the same power specs to them. The big difference on this was it does not have the digital face display so that you can see it. This has only got some lights on it that flash. So you have the number 8 wire coming into the two strings, so you have positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, a string. You want to go back up? There you go. And then positive, negative, or I should say negative to positive, and it flows through. So you have one string, and then you have your bus cable that goes between the negatives and a bus cable that goes between the positives, and then you could stack another string in front of it. But these two are pretty decent amount of power. Let's get you back over here. And so there you go. So most of you that I've talked to, I've told you to order these because it's a little easier to deal with. And you could, like I said, as long as you have a 4024 inverter, it's the same thing. And you can see I still have the plate up here somewhere I need to get screwed onto here. But you can see I have, there we go. You can see down in there, you got the two hots out, and the neutral in. I also have neutral out. Excuse me, red. All right, hot, neutral, hot. There you go. And then you have both the neutrals are together, and then you can see in there you got the hot one in, hot two in, and then. So I had the potential to bring in power from a generator to this Magnasign the same way that I do with the Schneider. These are nice little inverters too. Let's see. There's the information on it. And so these three wires go into here, and this is a 240 load center here. And I'm not going to go into the depth of that, but everything works off of it. Now, shut that off. It goes back to searching. And it goes back to shadow. Let's go. Out, out, out. Alright. Hey, Smokey. Alrighty there. I'm sure there would be 1,000 questions, but it's pretty simple. Most of these components, what are you doing, dude? I'll give you their wiring instructions with them, and if you can read and follow directions, it's not that hard. It really isn't. The big thing is understanding the whole equation, and the whole equation is really simple. What's the minimum? What's the minimum I want to be able to use the system for? What do I need to run with it? And for a lot of people, that boils down to The well, being able to run the water and the well pump. Now we run rainwater catchment, so our little water pump that keeps the pressure to the house is only 110. A little Harbor Freight shallow well pump does a fine job. But so sizing your system is going to be based on what do you need to do, and then whatever you need to do, kind of double it. So I've got 4 chest freezers running right now, and lights and stuff, and for the most part I have each one of those chest freezers, and I don't recommend running anything that requires heat. So refrigerators, I don't like refrigerators. Refrigerators are very inefficient. Every time you open the door, you dump out all that cold air. I like using, because of the efficiency of energy, I like using chest freezers for my food storage. And it used to be like we had, a long time ago, ice boxes. So I use a chest freezer as a refrigerator. That way it holds the cold air in when you open the lid on it. And for all intents, you don't have to worry about them pulling huge amounts of power. Let's see. 2 of these panels can run. So if you got good sun on it, full sun on 2 of these panels, there's almost 600 watts there. I can run all 4 of my freezers on that during the day. If I have full sun, I can run all 4 of them on. Now, I'm doing other things at the same time, so sometimes we'll run the water and the pump will kick on, and that'll pull another 500 watts. And while that's happening, and all of a sudden I'm pulling 1,000 watts. Well, I got 1,700 here, and there have been occasions when I'm in and out of clouds and I'm running things, and the well pump will kick on, and all of a sudden I'm pulling 1,000 watts for all 4 of my freezers and my water pump, and then all of a sudden the clouds roll in the middle of it, and it pulls the batteries instead of pulling off of the solar, and all of a sudden there's a big drawdown on the battery bank while I'm doing everything I need to do. Hello, Mittens. So that'll happen, and then while that's happening, then the sun pulls away, and then all of a sudden the batteries want to be charged again. Hey, sweetie. Say hi. And you're still running 4 freezers, and you're running the water pump, and that's almost 1,000 watts. So that's when I'll see the draw on the input into the charge controller run up to 13, 14, 1,500 watts in rare periods like that. But for the most part, it'll do just about anything I want. And I have a system duplicated for each system. So this cabin here will get more panels up for that cabin down there and on a pole, and eventually the system that I got in the shop, which runs the welder, the tools and stuff like that. I know you want some attention, don't you? Well, I think we're going to put a pole in here, and I'm only going to go with a couple panels here. I don't think I need to go with more than 2 panels for that, because it's not the same thing. I'll only be using 1 power tool at a time, and most of those power tools aren't going to require more than 600 watts for a very long period of time. 600 watt input for a welder, you're doing pretty good. And if you really know what you're doing, you can take a panel and hot wire and weld with a solar panel all by itself if you know what you're doing. But don't try that at home. Only if you're really educated and know what you're doing. Anyway, folks, long video. I hope this helps. I've gone through all the components and all the connections to those components and the basics all of the whole setup. For the most part, anybody's got some, little few neural connections clicking between the ears should be able to put this together. I would still, if you've never done any electrical before, I would always recommend that you have somebody who has some knowledge and experience be with you, and then take your time. Slow down. Got all our mints coming up. Woohoo! Take your time. Think through things. Ask questions. It is very, very simple if you keep some basics in mind, but ask questions if for some reason something doesn't feel right. If it doesn't feel right, go with your gut feeling and stop. Don't proceed until you have verified that what your actions are going to be are not only safe, but the correct actions for the system requirements. What I've gone through is the basics. There's a lot more that we could do on every one of these topics. We could go into a whole lot more detail. But if you know what I've told you and you can follow those steps and you can do some simple, neat, clean wiring, especially for safety, and pay attention to what I put together, you can duplicate that fairly easy. What do you think, Mittens? Have we done enough? I think, I don't know, it's probably an hour-long video now with all the parts and pieces. That's all I got for now. I would recommend that you download this so that you have it in case things happen. Download it. Have it to refer to, and you go back and go back and go back and watch and listen, as well as download all the other videos that I put together. That is the simplest, better than Cliff Notes, but very short, instructional. If you can do this, you've passed the exam. If you ask questions and you do it right the first time, give yourself extra credit, and then pat yourself on the back. Understanding what each one of these components do and how they work will allow you to troubleshoot should certain things happen. Like we had that one cold morning up in Montana, and the sun popped over the hill, and it was like 15 degrees, and it hit it so hard and fast that it popped the breakers out here, which was crazy because it shouldn't have, but it did. And we couldn't understand why we didn't have power, and we went looking through everything and finally pulled that open, and guess what? There was a breaker popped. But be careful. Anything more than 2 panels put together, you absolutely need disconnects. If you get hit with it, you're gonna feel it. It's gonna hurt, but it's not as likely to be as lethal. Once you start getting more than 2 panels put together, then you start getting really sketchy if you miswire or misconnect. So take your time, think through it, say things out loud. I'm connecting the positive to the positive. Let me visually verify that this is the positive wire. Let me label my wires, things like that. Do all the little tips and techniques and tricks that people who are skilled with what they do to make sure that they stay skilled. Follow those things that you see people do on other videos when you're talking about the master electricians. They do it because it pays off in the long run, for one, safety, and 2, for things working properly when you get them together. So all the power to you, my friends. Hope you enjoyed. That's good enough for now. Talk to you later. Take care. Bye-bye.